I'm attorney Larissa Davis. I'm an immigration attorney in the United States, and I am here to talk to you about interpreters and whether you can have an interpreter at your interview before USCIS. First, it depends what kind of interview. First, I want to address asylum interviews. So, USCIS has a specific set of contracted interpreters that they use and that you will have to use at your interview. In all my experience so far, they've been on the phone, and so as soon as you get to the interview and you sit down and the USCIS officer needs to communicate with you, they are going to put that interpreter on the phone to understand you. So there's a couple important things that we need to address. First, if you hear the word interpreter, it means somebody who is communicating between different languages verbally. You might also hear the word translator. Sometimes people say translator, but really that's not the correct use of the word, because a translator, even though they have a similar skill set because they are translating language, they're actually doing it through written resources. So if a person is translating something, that means they're translating a document, paper, written materials. An interpreter is somebody who's interpreting orally. So verbal language, they're talking, they're speaking, and interpreting one language into another and vice versa. So interpreter is the correct word to use when you are in need of someone to communicate with on your behalf at a USCIS interview. So there's a new rule in effect, especially with COVID having occurred in 2020. The date of this video is 2022. This rule is still in place until March of 2023. And basically USCIS has a final rule that extends the requirement for certain asylum applicants to use a USCIS contracted telephonic interpreter in order to keep the workforce and applicants safe during this COVID health emergency. So they're doing it for health purposes. It's effective until March 16th, 2023. So if you're an asylum applicant and you're unable to proceed with your affirmative asylum interview in English, USCIS will require you to use a USCIS contract interpreter at your interview instead of bringing your own interpreter. Now, if you have to have a USCIS interpreter, and let's say you speak a specific dialect of a language, then you want to make sure that you request that. Now, as I'm giving this information, obviously I'm speaking in English. So if you're watching this, you understand English, but maybe you have a family member that's come over and they're applying for asylum and they don't really speak that much English, or they don't speak English at all. And so you know that they speak a certain dialect of Spanish, of Arabic, of different languages, and so they need to have an interpreter that speaks that dialect. This is very important. I've been with clients before who got an interpreter on the line that maybe spoke Spanish or spoke Arabic or whatever the language was, but not their specific dialect, and so there was some difficulty in understanding the questions they were being asked, and we had to request another interpreter. I don't know how confident an applicant might be at a USCIS office to ask for an interpreter they understand. So I wanted to make this to encourage people out there who, have to go before USCIS and don't speak maybe a language that is spoken often or in a lot of places in the United States, and maybe it's a particular dialect to the part of the world that they come from. And so you can request that your interpreter speaks your dialect if you can't understand what they're saying, you're having difficulty understanding, because everything that you say is going into your record for your asylum application. So if there's any misunderstanding and you answer a question incorrectly, and I've been in interviews with clients who've done that because they didn't fully understand what was being asked, that could really harm your application. So as an attorney, when I'm at an interview, I can ask the USCIS officer to let me speak, to ask my client questions, and then I can clarify that. But if you're on your own at an interview, you might not realize you actually said something that isn't totally correct, or you misunderstood what was being asked, And so that could really be a problem for your application later down the road at an asylum interview. Now, why am I talking about asylum specifically? Because there are different rules for other types of for naturalization interviews. So I wanted to distinguish from that, because if you are going before a USCIS officer for an interview because you're being naturalized, congratulations, you went through the whole process, and now it's time for that last part before you're able to go to your oath ceremony. You have to be able to speak English. Now, there is an exception, and that's where a medical doctor has signed off on a specific form, the N648, and you have some reason to be excused from that requirement, and in that instance, you would be able to have a interpreter at your interview if you are going to a naturalization interview. However, there are very specific criteria for that. Maybe I'll make a video on that separately for naturalization, but this video is particular for interviews before USCIS, specifically asylum interviews, and so I hope that it's been helpful. And if you are a friend or family member of someone that you know is applying for asylum, or will be, or is going to have their interview soon, that they understand that they can request to have an interpreter that speaks their language, and specifically their dialect, so they can understand and answer appropriately when they're asked questions during their interview. If you would like to set up an appointment to speak with me about your particular case, you want legal representation, you can call my office. It's 601-724-9255. You can also email me. I'll put that in the description box below. And I'm also on Instagram, so if you want to follow me there, sometimes I upload clips, and I also try to post current events and information there. My Instagram is at asylum_attorney. And until next time, I hope this has been helpful to you. And give me a call if you need some legal assistance.